Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaving Nothing Undared, a podcast from Oblate School of Theology's Department of Continuing Education. I'm your host, Antonio Fritzi, and today we have a special conversation lined up as we delve into the powerful and ultimately healing topic of grief. We'll be talking about an upcoming event, the 2024 Women's Grief Retreat, entitled Journeying Through Grief and Loss with the Communion of Saints. This retreat will take place October 25th and 26th in person here at Oblate School of Theology. The Women's Grief Retreat is an invitation to journey through the experience of grief, whether the loss of a loved one, a career, a relationship, and to discover the sacred ways in which grief can transform us. I'm honored to speak today with two incredible women who will be leading this retreat, each of whom brings a unique background and perspective to help guide participants on this journey. Please welcome Christina Guerra, a talented poet, spiritual director, and retreat facilitator, and Yvonne Garcia, a licensed professional counselor with extensive experience in trauma and grief work. Yvonne, hello. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. So I want to make the most of our time together, and I'd love it if we could start by really delving into the experience that you bring to this retreat. As you well know, but our audience might not, you've spent decades working as a firefighter and paramedic, and now as a licensed professional counselor. So your work clearly focuses on helping people navigate trauma and grief. Can you share a bit about how that journey has shaped the approach that you plan to bring to this retreat?
Sure. I think I bring a lot of sensitivity just because of the experience, because even before that I was a teacher and there were other traumas and things going on at that level as well. But learning and trying to make connections all the time, I feel really strongly that knowledge is power. So I think what I really want to bring is I want to bring that sense of knowing what is going on, understanding it, and then that would hopefully help you to be able to process some of that grief a little bit better. When we talk about crisis, we always say you're having a normal reaction to an abnormal situation, and loss and grief it happens, but it's still very abnormal at times. So I feel like bringing a little bit of, and I don't want to say normalcy because everybody's grief is different, but a sense of normalcy so that they can understand it a little bit better.
Yeah, that's incredibly important. And one of the things that you mentioned that I want to draw out a little bit is at the beginning, you noted you were a teacher, right? There's different kinds of traumas. Everyone's experience of grief and loss is unique. So that indicates to me, as I'm sure you'll share with us, that grief can come from a number of different places and not just death, right? It comes from all
Absolutely.
sorts of losses. So whether it's a career or health or relationships, how can this retreat help participants process these different kinds of grief they might bring to the experience?
Well, I think that grief in whatever form is grief in your brain. And I kind of bring that, the physical and the mental aspect of how we deal with it, to the retreat, because if your brain senses danger, then it's going to react in a certain way. And it could be danger of, I'm not going to be able to pay my bills next month because I don't have a job, or I've lost this person that I've had in my life for so many years, and how am I going to navigate that? It's still the same kinds of things, the same kind of reaction that our body has. And so we really focus a lot on the physical and the mental aspect, at least in my part. And then, we include the spiritual as Tina jumps in. So, yeah.
That's so interesting. I don't think is super apparent to people, right? That when we're looking at the function of the brain and human experience, that grief is grief, right? And while, of course, we always honor the individuality of people's experience, there are these kind of shared processes and methods we might use to process grief, right?
Right.
So
Hmm.
how can this experience of facing this intense emotional pain influence or inform the tools and methods that you might share with participants to help manage their grief during the retreat?
Well, I think in the group setting, we're not, we, like I said, kind of about normalizing, but we're allowing people to have a safe space and a voice and to be able to share that with other people that are not going to be judging them, or it's just a safe space. And so I talk a lot about, what are the physical reactions? Do you even realize what this grief is doing to your body and to your, to how you're acting in the world? And so I bring those things up, and it's a safe space to talk about that.
And indeed, I think, those spaces are few and far between in our normal everyday lives. So taking the time and being really intentional about creating that space through participation in this retreat is a huge opportunity for people dealing with these kinds of stresses and
Mhm.
traumas, right? And
Right.
again, this is probably not super well known, but from my understanding, there's a deep connection between unresolved trauma or unresolved grief and our mental and physical and spiritual well-being. So, how can this retreat, can your participation in this retreat help those who choose to attend recognize and begin to address the deeper layers of grief that may not be immediately apparent?
Hmm. Well, we start with the education. Here's some of the symptoms that you might be having. Here are some of the physical manifestations of grief that you might not think are grief. Getting sick, your immune system being lowered, just a lot of different stuff like that. So we start with the knowledge and the information, and then we give them the space, and we ask them the right questions. We're not trying to tell them what to do. It's more of, here's what we've got. Here's what you may be experiencing, and then we ask a question, and it lets them delve deeper into their own personal grief and into putting their pieces and connecting their dots so that
Mhm.
they can move forward in their journey. So we're not trying to fix them or say, hey, get over it. We're trying to help them, give them these tools in a safe space that we all understand, so that they can move in their own journey.
It sounds to me, that this is this incredible environment in which you and Christina are really committing to walking together with the participants, and
Mhm.
how important that is in navigating, uncovering, processing, and coming to terms with these losses that we've all experienced in one way or another. So I want to thank you, Yvonne. You bring real compassionate and professional presence and insight to this work. We're so grateful to have you lead this retreat alongside Christina. Before you go, are there any final thoughts or words of encouragement or insight that you would offer those considering joining us?
I think I would say, don't be afraid. You know, give it a shot, because you don't know what you don't know sometimes. And this might be just the avenue that might open up some of those insights for you, something that might help you get to that next place in your life and be able to integrate that grief into your life rather than it holding you back. You're able to kind of bring it together and give your life different meaning, and be able to move forward.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Thank
We
you. I
appreciate it.
appreciate it.
Yeah. So, Christina, we'll turn to you now. You have had yourself a profound personal journey with grief, and it's shaped much of your work in spiritual direction and retreats. And I know that you and Yvonne have offered this retreat at Oblate in particular for a few years. So I'm hoping you can tell us a bit about what's inspired you to design the Women's Grief Retreat and how your experiences have influenced its creation.
Oh, Well, I'm going to try to answer that as succinctly as possible. It began with a couple of friends of mine and colleagues that initially started out with us, and other responsibilities and demands pull them away. But we were talking about it. Both of them had experienced death of parents, and I was on the heels of losing my husband, who I cared for at home. And because I spent a lot of time caring for him, and after his death, in solitude, not so much as in a depression type state, but more of, I was aware that I was on a grief journey and I needed to exercise self-compassion and self-care. So I kind of took a sabbatical from many things for, close to a year, to take care of that and reflect. So I spent a lot of time in that solitude, learning, praying, and understanding that grief is very complex, and it's not just about death. It's sometimes, I think, in my world, in my view, the death is like the big one, but there's been a lot of deaths or losses up until that point, and because we didn't recognize them, they went untended. And as I was mapping my own life, I realized it went back all the way to when I was 5, and looking at the lessons I learned in those losses, everything from losing a school community because we moved, to death of grandparents, to my own illness and inability to be what I thought was physically whole at the time. So those are just some examples. Career transitions. And I realized that I call it cumulative grief. It just added up to where something that it probably came to the forefront with that big death of someone you cared for. And I just knew that there was a way to navigate this. And coming back to the mind, body, spirit connection, how important that is. I find it very interesting. We use the number 3 a lot, the mind, body, spirit. When we break into small groups, we break into triads, groups of 3. The retreat itself has a format of 3 pieces: teaching, knowledge, pondering, and experience. The teaching is part of the knowledge, then the pondering, and then the segue into experiential. So that there's this movement that I believe the spirit in all of us is very, very familiar with and comfortable in. So it just came all together that way.
Wow, that's incredible. I want to pull out 2 ideas, I think, in what you've shared that it would be helpful to go deeper, I think. One of them is this idea of untended grief, right? And
Mhm.
closely related, what you called cumulative grief, or this kind of compounding effect that grief can
Right,
have.
right.
And so it seems from your story that this grief clearly impacted a number of areas of your life, shaped your relationships, and ultimately touched your faith and relationship with God. So, how has the realization of that compounded and cumulative grief impacted you? And in particular, what do you hope participants in this retreat will discover about their own experiences of grief?
Okay, I believe that if we're not aware of something, we can't tend to it. So not knowing can put you in a handicapped position of trying to become more whole. And these lessons we learn as we move through the different losses in our life, if we really look at our lives, we see that it's a lot of loss that people often judge as, oh, that's a little one, or that's a big one, or that's a big one, or that's a really big one, when in reality, our response physiologically, psychologically, and spiritually are all impacted by. In one particular health crisis, for example, and I grew up in the Catholic tradition throughout my life, and the women religious were amazing. They taught me age-appropriate terms that I learned through my spiritual direction training, actually had deeper meaning and a much bigger term, but I was able to connect that with what I learned as a child. But in that health crisis, I remember sharing with someone, I always said, I believed in God, I believe in God, I have faith in God, I trust God, and I'm okay with knowing that at some point my physical body will end here on earth. But get faced with a terminal illness, and it's like, oh, wow, do I really believe that? So I had to really dive deeper in asking that question, because I felt confident I did until faced with that, and had to really, really dive deeper and understand what that meant for me moving forward from that health crisis. So I think all of us have that potential of becoming more whole once we see that, and tapping into what we probably already had, but we weren't able to connect those dots together. I've come to the conclusion that grief and loss is just another part of living, and we haven't done a good job in teaching people that, and helping them to understand it. So they don't believe that it's done when that happens, that there is more to it, and there's purpose in all of it. And we have that opportunity to cooperate with God to see that purpose and to move forward with it.
That's incredible. This immense opportunity for recognizing the shared experience across different human lives, right? And that while, for example, in your story, grief manifested itself in a particular way to you, that can inform our own experience, and what we share with one another in the retreat setting can deeply move us towards a recognition of our untended grief, our cumulative grief, and the role that it's played in our lives, and encouraging us, in a sense, to strive for that wholeness. I want to shift a little bit and mention that, this retreat is framed in terms of, or around, the communion of saints and journeying with them. So could you share a bit about how you see the lives of those who came before us, similarly helping us process our grief and loss?
Oh, absolutely. I think that was, one of those profound moments of revelations in my own journey to understand. And there's science behind trauma and grief paying forward in generations. They're seeing it in the generations of those that were the future generations of the Holocaust survivors. So seeing that, knowing that we're wired that way, tapping into those who came before us who survived in their own way and found ways. Oftentimes people take the term saints as meaning this perfect person that went to heaven. And it's so much bigger than that. It's the ancestors that came before us. We stood on the shoulders of giants. If we really take a pause and look back and ask ourselves, what did we learn from them that's in there, that's our inner resource that we can tap into? In my case, one of my more profound ones was my grandmother. Oh my gosh, she lost so much in her life. She lost a child at infancy. She lost a teenager after she had to her and my grandfather had to make this horrendous decision about an amputation to save his life. And then he ended up dying anyway later of pneumonia. And then her husband, she just lost so many people And yet she was always praying, always praying, always praying over us and with us, and always had a meal to share. So remembering the modeling, she modeled for me resiliency through her faith. So that's an example. Did she talk about it? Maybe if I asked her questions, but I think sometimes we learn more by watching than we do by listening. That's why our experiential part, the pondering and experiential part, taps into that, and where we're able to learn from each other. You know, if we really stop and think about it, almost all of Jesus' ministry was relational. So we're creating that safe space for relationships to sync with one another and shared common experiences, though the nuances and specifics are unique to each person. But somehow that feeds into, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. There's others like me. I'm okay. And I think that that really helps us really hang on to much more of our shared pasts and our shared destinies.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you're pointing to or speaking to is the rich tradition that's being brought to this retreat, right? Both the spiritual and religious dimension, but also, as you noted, these increased realizations that we're getting from the areas of counseling, of psychology, of working with individuals who, as individuals or as communities, have had these experiences of trauma and grief and loss. And one of the unique elements of this retreat is the combined backgrounds of yourself and Yvonne in spiritual direction and counseling, and the holistic approach to grief that this creates in the experience of going through the retreat. So could you speak to how you and Yvonne balance these two perspectives in the retreat to offer participants a well-rounded, holistic experience?
I think it ended up being a beautiful blend of the mind, body, and spirit. Through spiritual direction training, there were components that gave me snapshots and sneak previews about the mind, body, spirit connection. So I have a basic knowledge, but I don't have the background that Yvonne does in how to direct it better into resources and tools to navigate it, and to help people become aware that these other manifestations should be tended to also, that you cannot just focus on one. So, and Yvonne has assisted me on numerous retreats, and not just grief and loss and trauma, but other ones that she's been able to connect that mind and body into it. And it just seems to have this amazing dimension coming together the way God created us to be. So it ended up being the model that we believe that is necessary to be the best version of ourselves that God created us to be. And we spend a lot of time in the prep in those components and seeing how they link together, so that the retreatants can also connect the dots in their own lives, and then have those aha moments where, well, that's why I feel that way, or that's why I do what I do, so that they can move forward in more healthy ways and whatever they're going to be called to do for the rest of their life.
So it's this powerful connecting of mind, body, and spirit, unique to the individual, right? I think, to my understanding, one of the things that you encourage people to do is to bring personal items, right? Like photos of
Yes.
loved ones, or perhaps a favorite coffee mug. And moreover, that it's not only this individual experience, but a communal journey together on the retreat. So can you shed a little bit of light on those two elements? What's the significance of bringing these items and creating a sacred and comforting space? And what kind of activities might these retreatants expect to engage in with one another?
That's a wonderful question. It reminded me after my husband died, having to sift through my home and what I wanted to do with my life after that, and realizing, why was I holding on to things? And the connection to a embodied experience often kept us connected to things that we held on to. And I'll give you a little bit of a humorous example, but in my career, I wore suits all the time. And, you know, working 30 years in my career, it was challenging to make sure I didn't fall into thinking that what I did was who I was or who I am. So, but when I retired, I didn't want to get rid of the suits. I didn't want to get rid, and where was I going to wear suits? Who wants to wear suits in hot San Antonio? Okay. I mean, it took me 2 years. And it was through prayerful thought and journeying with my own spiritual director and the invitation to share my life with other women. So I was very particular and selective as to where they went. So it was as if I was sharing my energy with others in that experience, in the letting go, to bless someone else in the receiving. That reciprocity and synchronicity is foundational to healthy relationships. It's the ebb and flow, the give and take, and not the just receive, 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 or give, give, give. And I think that helps us understand why we're holding on to things and what do we need to do, because not everything is intended to be held on to forever, especially our bodies. Okay. So it helps others make that connection so they can sit with what they're holding on to until they're called to release it. And I think that was probably one of the most powerful parts of moving into that experience myself.
Wow. Thank you. That's an incredible journey, and one that I'm sure, along with Yvonne's expertise, is going to imbue this retreat with an incredible richness and just opportunity for connection and touching those deep wells of human experience and relationship with God that we so long for in our day-to-day lives.
Oh, absolutely. Right? Absolutely.
On a final note, right, for anyone who might feel a little hesitant or unsure about confronting their grief in a group setting, right, like this retreat, what might you offer or encourage them to reflect on in considering that opportunity?
I want to echo Yvonne's comments. Do not be afraid. That's one of my favorite sites in scripture. Do not be afraid. And we break it into very small groups, like I said, of 3, and they're given the freedom to share or not share. And there's a way we process through that is very comfortable, and you don't get that stare down because you're not saying anything. And what, for me, that I have seen consistently at these retreats are the shared experiences of who the Spirit puts in those triads, and how many of them have stayed connected after the retreat. So there's purpose in that. It's who is being called to come. So if you feel that nudge, don't let fear keep you from coming. You're not going to be forced to do anything that you're not comfortable with.
Thank you. I want to reiterate how grateful we are to you and to Yvonne for sharing your wisdom today. And then, of course, for graciously agreeing to facilitate this retreat and provide what is such a wonderful, wonderful source of comfort and, processing that is needed in the community. So I'm very grateful to both of you, and I'm very confident that this retreat is going to offer a beautiful space for women to reflect and heal and connect with their own grief in meaningful ways. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to the retreat.
And thank you for your support and trying to reach the masses that may be called to come. So thank you again.
Thank you. To everyone listening, if you or someone you know could benefit from this retreat, we encourage you to join us for the 2024 Women's Grief Retreat, Journeying Through Grief and Loss with the Communion of Saints. Again, it's happening in person at Oblate School of Theology, Friday, October 25th from 6 to 8 p.m. and Saturday, October 26th from 9 a.m. until 4 p.m. Tickets are $100 and space is limited, so you can register by visiting our website, www.ost.edu. Thank you for watching this podcast, Leaving Nothing Undared, where we continue to explore the bold ways we can grow together in faith and understanding. Until next time, I'm Antonio Fritzi. Be well and leave nothing undared for the gospel. God bless you.